Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Dirks, and on behalf of ACRL and Choice, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, A Generation Apart, The Changing Expectations of Modern Researchers, which is sponsored by ProQuest. Today's discussion is one in a series of sponsored webinars from ACRL and Choice that addresses new ideas, developments, and products of interest to the academic library community. Free to users, these structured 60-minute live presentations provide the opportunity for interactive discussions of important new issues and developments in academic librarianship by librarians, vendors, authors, and other interested stakeholders. Before we get started, I'd like to point out a few features of the webinar software. In the main area of the screen, you should be able to follow along with the presentation materials. Along the right-hand side, you will see a chat panel. If you don't, you can click the button labeled Chat in the upper right corner of the screen to activate the panels. Please use it to submit your questions to our speakers, to let us know responses to open-ended polling questions that may occur. And at the end of the presentation, we will take a few minutes to answer your questions, so please do put them in throughout. If you experience any technical issues, you can select the host option from the chat dropdown, and that will allow us to communicate privately about any technical issues you may have. Today, we're using the hashtag ACRL Choice Webinars during the event, so if you have another screen handy, shout out to us. We're at choice_reviews on Twitter. Also note that we are recording today's program, and all attendees should receive a follow-up email with instructions and a link to the archived version. Our presenters today are Serena Rosenhan, the VP of User Experience at ProQuest, and Stephen Kemsley, who is the Senior User Experience Designer at ProQuest. And Stephen focuses on ProQuest's K-12 products. So with that, I think we are ready to move into the main part of the presentation. So I will turn the floor over to Serena.
Thank you, Mark. Stephen and I are glad to be here today to talk about one of our, well, really our favorite subject, which is our users and the research that we get to do to try to understand their needs and how to serve them better. My team and I were recently compiling the findings of a user research study. That study involved observing 23 researchers from different disciplines who were working on an academic research project. And as we were compiling and writing up the study, it struck me that, despite the rapid evolution of technology that researchers have at their disposal, or even the ongoing transformation of the library in this post-print digital age, the tasks and behavior patterns of researchers are not fundamentally different in 2017 from those that I observed 10 years ago when we did our first large-scale contextual inquiry project. That was about 2007. And just to explain briefly, contextual inquiry is one of the techniques in our toolbox for understanding users. It involves observing users doing actual research tasks in their own context. It allows us to see the world from their point of view and learn about behaviors and pain points that we wouldn't otherwise know about. So at ProQuest, we try to do this kind of contextual inquiry study periodically, just to make sure we are keeping in close touch with those needs and pain points. As I had this insight and it struck me, I went back and started reviewing some of the research that we had done, and if I've counted correctly, we've probably observed over 300 researchers. This would be undergraduates, community college, up through faculty, and over the past 10 years. Now, of course, we have other techniques such as usability studies, surveys, behavioral analytics, related secondary research. Those help round out the picture. But it seemed appropriate today to step back and take a look at what were users doing 10 years ago, what are they doing now, what has changed, and really more importantly, what hasn't. So I'd like to start off that exploration by sharing a quote from a report from a similar kind of study that was conducted at the University of Washington. And they reported that students reported being challenged, confused, and frustrated by the research process, despite the convenience, relative ease, or ubiquity of the internet. So I would just ask, does this sound like any of your students? Does this feel familiar? Does it resonate with you? If it does, probably should point out that this study was actually published in 2008. But I would argue that while some aspects of the research process are much better, it is still a challenging, confusing, and frustrating experience for many users. But let's dig into this in a little bit more detail. So it was actually a little bit of a different world 10 years ago. I had to refresh my memory as I was preparing for this. It was kind of fun to level set. So typically library websites were, I'll just call them early generation, maybe an externalization of the structure of the library, and often as difficult and intimidating as the library itself to the user who really did not understand that context. Library websites had a prominent search box, but which was enticing to users, but it usually only searched the library catalog or physical holdings of the library. Links to electronic databases and journals were listed on an e-resource page or an A to Z database list. And we were all very concerned, librarians and providers alike, about the attractiveness of Google to students and feared that they would abandon library resources in favor of that Google experience. So just to level set, the technology picture surrounding this environment was before there was really any kind of notion of a cloud or cloud storage for the general population. The iPhone was just released that year, but really it was out of the reach of most students' budgets. We really didn't see students with a lot of those fancy new gadgets. Social media was present, but on a smaller scale than today, and hadn't yet displaced email and instant messaging as communication tools. Facebook was actually still for college and university communities only. And I remember hearing about avant-garde librarians creating Facebook pages in order to be available to students in this popular space. So I'm going to share a series of observations and do a little bit of comparison of then and now to talk about, again, what has changed and what hasn't changed. One of the primary research questions that we had when we still have when we do contextual interviews is, how do users choose which library resources to use? So this was actually a little bit of a revolutionary question for us. We had often been focused on just the usability of our platform and our tool and hadn't thought as much about how users ended up getting there. So it was quite eye-opening to observe students struggling with this task, searching a catalog for scholarly articles or looking through that A to Z database list, trying to remember which one they were told to use by their professor, and often choosing the wrong database for the task. I remember observing a third-year biology major doing work for a biology class who consulted JSTOR as their only research resource for their assignment. And JSTOR is a fine resource, but doesn't typically have a lot of information for biology majors. We found that students were often introduced to one tool and they would stick with it, or if it didn't work, they would abandon that for Google. They didn't have a lot of understanding of and distinguishing between databases. For example, we remember somebody assumed that LexisNexis was a law database, and but they were using it, the piece that they had access to, again, didn't provide that content. So there was a lot of failure to understand that, and some solved for this by maybe searching 2 databases at a time in separate tabs. Those are the kinds of things that we observed. So seeing this is a study that actually led to the development and release of the first library discovery service, which is Summon. And now, today, we see a wide adoption and use of discovery services. They've addressed a lot of these issues, and students aren't experiencing that same kind of pain. It's much easier to start research. But the breadth of content search can have some challenges for users. And these are both quotes from a recent study. So the one on the left is not from 2007, just illustrating that there is still some pain around that. around databases, and even though discovery services are easy to use, sometimes it's difficult to get to the right type of and level of content that students are looking for. And we can talk about maybe why that is. Another question, research question that we had was about how students really use Google. We call the Google threat. And as we observed and talked to students, what we found is that they used it in conjunction with library resources. In fact, in that early study, 95% of users we observed used library resources, and so only 5% tried to accomplish their tasks without library resources. Many expressed that they knew that library resources were the source of credible information that could be cited in their scholarly work. But they still needed to turn to Google for tasks that the library databases did not support well. About 68% of those in that study used Google or Google Scholar. And those tasks are topic overviews, getting oriented to a topic, and going to Wikipedia. One of the things I think we see that has changed a little bit is that students are less apologetic about going to Wikipedia, and librarians and professors know that they're going there. It's kind of understood, but they also understood that they won't be citing that. What they do talk about now is they go there for the references specifically and recognize which references they might be able to find and use in their library resources. So it really becomes this entry point. Other reasons that people use Google, and this can still happen today, is for content that they don't expect the library to have. Students heavily associate libraries with scholarly journals. If they are doing an assignment that requires something other than that, they don't even try the library database often, unless they've had a good instruction. That's certainly the exception there. So, for example, a business student who needs to put together a business case and needs some statistical data is usually consulting the open web. So we still have this challenge that students aren't necessarily aware of the breadth and range of resources available at their library. The other task that we saw using Google, and probably more particularly Google Scholar, is for comprehensiveness. So students would search in library databases, but they would also check Google Scholar to make sure they hadn't missed anything, particularly a graduate student maybe who needs to do a comprehensive literature review or needs to keep up and make sure something isn't getting published that hasn't made it to the database yet. So we saw that use, and we are still seeing that use now. And there's a sense that Google Scholar is a little bit more widely used now for really the same purpose, that there might be something there I need to double check. I really need to know if I've got my knowledge of everything that's out there. The next topic that we thought about is that library resources continue to be trusted, and this really has not changed. There's a general awareness and trust of if I get a source from the library, I can cite it, it's vetted, and I think students actually appreciate that. The one thing that we have found in some of the other research, though, is students are a little less willing to seek out help from librarians. And there's a sense, especially in this mobile instant answer age, that will take longer than just finding an answer themselves. So there's maybe some work to do there. But we're going to come back to this subject a little bit later on in the presentation. Some other topics from comparison. Some things that haven't changed. Topic selection is still a time-consuming task. I have noticed a subtle shift. Students used to be very concerned. They would express it to see if they could find enough material on the topic and get their hands on it in time, in the time frame that they had to do their assignment. And often you would see a student, you would watch them, they would find a very promising article, and they would click through to try to get to it, only to be presented with a login screen that they didn't know how to pass through. And so they would abandon that article. They did not tend to want to pursue a library loan, interlibrary loan, because that was the unknown. They needed to, they were in a hurry and they didn't have the time for that, and they did not know how to pass through it. But today, the question is a little bit more shifted to, can I find the right material for my project? They're not as concerned about can I find material, but maybe it's, is it going to be supportive of the way I need to use it, the questions I have at the right level. And that does seem to be more what we're seeing now. Search behavior is another area that has not changed significantly over time. Keyword searching is the norm, even among more experienced searchers, and that might be a little bit of a newer insight that we've been acknowledging here. And sometimes the searchers will sort of apologize and, yeah, I know I should probably use this differently, but I just really prefer to put in the keywords and cast a wide net, see what comes back. And sometimes this is actually a very deliberate strategy. They don't want to overlimit. They know that there's other ways that they can refine terms. We do see some basic limiting to peer review or date, but very little fielded searching and targeted in the more traditional sort of database structure way. Full text is expected, which is consistent. There's varying levels of confidence in the options for linking through to full text. And it really depends on if user has a good experience with those kinds of links, they will continue to try them. If the user, if they cause trouble, they will stop trying them. So I think we've seen that as a pain point as well. We are starting to see some users go beyond plain keyword searching. This shouldn't be too surprising, but I think it's worth calling out. Doing things like including formats like the word PDF in their search box, right in their query. It's good to be aware of that because not all database algorithms are tuned to interpret those in any way other than a straight match. They're also getting more comfortable with natural language searching. I think they experienced this in their everyday, all day long searching and inquiry kinds of experiences with Google, with Siri and Alexa. Why shouldn't any other search box work the same? I think they are willing to try it out and see what happens. Okay. So I want to shift now to some areas where maybe time and technology has had a more notable impact on our user behavior. So first, let's just level set about some of the features of our current context that are relevant in this conversation. So research in 2017 is in the context discovery services are well integrated into users' workflows. I call this out because about 4 or 5 years ago, we actually, it was interesting, you could go and talk to students at a university, and the students who were entering the university were getting trained in the discovery service, but the students who were maybe in the first year graduate program hadn't had that when they started, and didn't have the adoption in those ages. So I think we are seeing now that it's very common and people are very comfortable and familiar with discovery services. Google Scholar, more common as I mentioned before. I've heard the term Googlepedia. Use is expected as a research start. Again, it's using Google, but it's really to get to that Wikipedia kind of overview topic to orient you and allow you to go and search in those library tools. We've got more content delivered electronically. And learning management systems, as in virtual learning environment, are featuring more prominently in the student experience than they were 10 years ago. They existed, but we really didn't see them playing a role in our observations. And in terms of more broad technology, we've got cloud, we've got mobile. The mobile device is part of the uniform, as I said. It makes students constant searchers. And these things, cloud and mobile, both create expectations for their experiences with other tools. So just a note back on the topic of the learning management system. I pulled this word cloud from a report that a study we did late last year, and it shows the online resources used as a starting point by the researchers in the study. And where did they initiate their research? The type size is reflective of the number of participants who mentioned using the tool or used the tool. And 12 of 19 students noted using their institution's learning management system to begin their research. So they're going there for the course, the instructions are there, instructors are often posting PDFs, videos, lecture recordings, assignment lists, links to related readings, and things like that. That really is a behavior that is becoming much more familiar and prominent. And then on the other side of that, once those assignments are written, students are often submitting their assignments through those systems. And it's much more integrated into the workflow, something to be aware of. So a little bit more color on the cloud and mobile point that I was making earlier. Those of you who are working and seeing students every day see this as well, that it's part of the uniform, that mobile connected device. And this and the cloud create increasing expectations for portability, information portability. It's not uncommon for students to work on projects from different devices. They might work from home and then in a location on the library. In some of the latest rounds of research we've done, there were students who just said, I don't like carrying my laptop to campus. I leave it at home. I don't need to be burdened with that. I'll just use a computer here at the library. I can get to everything I need. It's a little bit of a contrast from 10 years ago. All that work was very focused. Research was managed by emailing links to yourself, maybe copying links into your reference document that was just your document to save all the links that you wanted to be able to find and get back to, and a lot of downloading to PDFs. And while we still do see a lot of that activity for various reasons, today there seems to be a little bit of a sense that, I can always find it again. Occasionally we've seen people doing things like writing an essay without copying, without downloading a PDF or saving a link somewhere for future reference. They're just working online with open tabs, copying and pasting the material they need, and they close the tabs when they're done. They aren't worried about getting back. I think there's a high confidence that they can if they need to find those things again. Now, most students do still tell us they prefer to use those larger screens for the majority of their research tasks. But we're starting to see more of an integration of mobile into the educational experience. This is an example of the Campus M suite, which makes your university, the interactions between the student and the university, delivers them through your mobile app. And I would hypothesize that's probably the wave of the future. It's certainly where the generations the students that are coming up are comfortable. We'll have to see what happens with that in terms of research and how that integrates into the experience. So I pulled this slide in because I thought it was an interesting illustration of this point. It's actually from a survey done of students just at one campus, but we can see that an equal number of students save to the cloud, put their documents and things in, say, a Google Docs or Dropbox kind of thing. Others still do prefer to save to computer. It's not that that's gone away, but we're definitely seeing both preferences, and for some different reasons there. Some still do save and email. There's obviously habits that work there, but the sense of portability and the need to get to research on any device, I think, informs a lot of our understanding of how those research experiences are being shaped. And finally, one of the original research questions that we had back in 2007 with Facebook and social media on the scene was, how does social media, how do you use it in your research? And we actually found that the answer was they don't. And some of the students laughed when we asked the question, to be honest. So they very much were keeping their school and their social worlds distinct. And then today in 2017, we are starting to see a little more presence in social media. Maybe not as we usually imagined it. I think in 2007 we were thinking, oh, you're going to use it to share our content. And we don't see that too much, but it is used for the things that social media is very good at, which is networking, following people who are key in the field, maybe joining a group that is a topic group that is relevant to the research in order to make connections. And this is a quote from a researcher we talked to recently, and showing just how astute I think the modern researcher is about copyright and sharing. And I think they understand that they have to be very careful, and so they shy away from that kind of use of social media with our research. So the sum of this discussion, I thought it was really interesting to think about some of the things that are the same, some of the things that are different, and how the researcher looks today. And when we can take what I think we can do is take a cue from the fact that while technologies are different, they may help find relevant resources more easily. There are still some things that are very ingrained and approaches that researchers take that maybe aren't going to change and that we should understand and recognize. Sometimes I think we give too much credit to technology as a disruptor, and there's habit and user goal and need that play in equally well. Relevant content is still the most important thing. The medium isn't as important, although users do express preferences for one thing or the other. And the role of the professor and the librarian as an influencer in the resources is really still crucial to learning about those available resources in the library, to using them effectively, to which ones they'll choose. Just because they are very savvy technologically doesn't mean they understand the scope of scholarly work and how to access and navigate it. So that's kind of my look back. Today, now I'm going to hand it over to Stephen, who is going to talk a little bit more about what we do with some of this data, how we make meaning of it, and apply it in some of our design.
Thanks, Serena. So our user experience team, as Serena mentioned, has interviewed and observed hundreds of researchers in the past 2 years. We watch them struggle through the research process, and we learn about their needs in a way that we can't do from behind a computer screen looking at analytics. So we're seeing them in the context of where they're doing research, and when they get frustrated, we see that very visibly. So based on our research, we've developed 5 user profiles that we use as really signposts to guide our new feature and product development, and to make sure that we're on the right track and we're always referring to real user needs. And I'm going to go ahead and describe each of these, and be curious if any of these profiles reflect your experience in observing researchers. So the first one is the guided researcher, and here we're talking about the high school student or the freshman in a community college. They're still learning the basics of academic research and leaning very heavily on assistance to accomplish basic research tasks, usually from librarians and instructors. The assignment researcher is, they've gone through the research process before. They might be undergraduate, first or second year, but their investment is very low. Their mantra is often just good enough. good enough content. They want to get what they need for their current assignment, close the book, and move on with their life. The domain learner, right in the middle there, is someone that's beginning to commit to a specific field and get a little more investment in that field. So they're learning about key figures, they're learning terminology, maybe even the names of popular journals. Aspiring Scholar is the Ph.D. candidate or the new faculty member that's trying to make a name for themselves. They may be doing very in-depth research, like a literature review for a thesis. And the established scholar is looking for new grant opportunities, working papers, and cutting-edge research. These are people that have published several papers, for example. But today I'm going to give you a few examples of the middle three, because these are really they comprise the bulk of the users that we observe using library services. So Adam here, we've observed him last year. He's classified him as an assignment researcher. He was in a political science class, but he hadn't yet committed to that domain as his major. And for his assignment, he had to piece together information from scholarly sources and videos, which he mostly went to YouTube for, and then to create not only a paper, but also a multimedia deliverable. So in his case, he actually couldn't really he felt he couldn't use the library resources to accomplish everything he needed to do. He needed to go to YouTube and look at political advertisements and dissect them there, as well as use library resources. Megan is we classified her as a domain learner. She's a third-year undergraduate and very invested in the field of psychology. And she's helping her advisor on a research paper, collaborating with other fellow students as well. Interesting thing about her is that we could have observed her process in 2007 and we wouldn't have been surprised by anything we saw. For example, their team is still mailing Word files back and forth using one version with changing the file name every time, and they're not using any sort of cloud service. So this kind of goes to show that not every researcher is using the latest and greatest techniques. And here's Loan. She's an aspiring scholar, and her behavior is really emblematic of what we see from this profile. She was conducting a literature review for her thesis, and she would conduct the same search over and over across months. So she knew the results items for that very specific search very well, and would notice if a new paper appeared. So once she whittled down the results to a few hundred results, she would review every last result to make sure she's not missing anything, since comprehensiveness is so important for that task. Before I go further, I want to clarify a common misperception, which is pretty widespread, that just because you're an advanced researcher means you're an advanced searcher. I think the quote says it well here from Chris, who's an English professor, who says, I know there are other ways in, but I just want to do a quick search. I'm quite a quick search person. I don't like going in through a lot of complicated pathways. And we see this perspective reflected through a lot of advanced researchers, like this Aspiring Scholar and established scholars. Simple keyword searches are really common, and it's rare that we see someone do a fielded advanced search or use Boolean operators. Now, later on, I'm going to talk about high school students. I'm going to talk about the next generation of researchers coming into universities and colleges. And to get you in the mindset of what we'll be talking about, I'd like to do a little poll. So if you've listened to a show like Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me on NPR, this is kind of like their quiz where you have to pick the false answer. So here are 4 observations we've recorded by observing high school students in usability tests and by talking to teachers and librarians. So your task in the poll is just to guess which one I've made up here. So Mark set up the poll in the WebEx, and I'll get to the answer in a moment. So when it comes to support today's researchers with new products and features, we have to take our profiles and answer 3 questions. What is the researcher problem or need? How does the idea support the researcher's workflow? That is, does it require them to change their habits and process, which is, if you've ever tried to change someone's habits, it's an uphill battle. Or does it adapt to their existing process, which is usually much better received? Third, does the design work the way the researcher expects? So when they click for example, like the download button, do they actually get to download their document, or do they see a login screen? Next slide here. Okay. One thing Serena mentioned earlier was the need for overview content when researchers are starting an assignment, especially for those that aren't too invested in the field that they're studying, like guided researchers or assignment researchers. The natural go-to to get an overview is obviously Google, Wikipedia, like we've talked about before. But this presents another problem, which is weeding out unreliable sources. And so we've started to include topic overviews in our products. So if researchers want, they can focus on finding the best source instead of spending a lot of time evaluating whether something is or isn't fake news, for example. This is a screenshot from eLibrary, a database that has topic overviews with links to overview articles on a given subject. Video is also a great way to learn about a topic, but we've also found that it has a bit of a credibility problem. People love videos. Students, especially undergraduates, use them all the time, especially on YouTube, to gain an understanding of a topic. But when we ask them if they would use it for scholarly research or cite it, they often respond that they haven't even thought about doing that. Videos usually don't have citations, and there's really no guarantee that the information within is reliable unless they do a lot of supporting research. We found through user testing that this hesitation goes away in large part when they encounter a video in the context of an academic resource. So this is an example of a 60 minutes video in our global news stream database. The last example I'll give from ProQuest, the ProQuest world, deals with a document page redesign that we did a couple years ago. So here we wanted to align our design with the tools and the sites they interact with every day, which are aesthetically pleasing and well organized. And this is important not just because it makes the site look nice, and we like to look at nice things, but because those are actually cues that users use to evaluate how confident they should be of the website they're using. So if something looks like it's falling apart at the seams, can a user really trust the experience will be reliable? And we find the answer is no. So a quote that we've pulled out from our research captures this attitude. Definitely the nicest looking database I've ever seen. The ones available from my library are gross, clunky, and poorly made. So I'm going to go over a couple of the changes we made that I think impacts their experience, especially given the fact that we see a lot of researchers coming in from discovery services and not necessarily starting on ProQuest. So oftentimes when they get to a database from a discovery service, they're disoriented, we found, and they can't find what they're looking for easily. So we took for example, we took the title and we made it much larger. So even though they're on a new user interface, it would quickly orient them to the result item they clicked on, and they'll know that they're in the right place. And then another simple thing that we did was just made a way more obvious way to download the document by making it a big button instead of a list. And this reflects their main task, which is oftentimes they just want to download the document and get back to the results list. So now I'm going to talk about tomorrow's researchers, and the poll questions should be, let's see, do we have those answers yet? Well, I will go ahead and reveal the answer, which is A. So after getting irrelevant results, some students tried searching again, putting quotes around their searches. So we actually haven't observed that. And I've tested many high school researchers, and I don't think I've ever seen them use quotation marks to narrow down their topic. And yes, C is actually, one student was, a teacher told us they wrote an entire paper on a smartphone, which is astounding to me, but I guess maybe it's going to become more normal going forward. Let's see. So before I dig into findings from our user research, I'm going to read a few quotes from interviews that we conducted with high school teachers and librarians across the country. They illustrate, I think, several behavioral trends that we've noticed in our own usability testing with high schoolers. Sarah, a high school librarian, says, if the information isn't presented graphically, students will skip right over it. And this is, images are, I think, more than pretty pictures. They draw attention, and they, more importantly, they give the student context about the article that they're reading that helps orient them to the words on the page. Michael, a high school history teacher, told us that students are used to small chunks of reading. When you pull up an article, the first thing they do is scroll down. They're asking themselves, how long is this? They are trained to use Control F to find what they want. So lots of scholarly articles are longer than the blog posts that a lot of students are used to reading on their phones. And when it comes time to sit down for 30 minutes and read a paper, it's a real challenge. Michael told me that they were trying to build stamina for reading. And when I asked if they were succeeding, he kind of laughed and sighed at the same time. So I think that told me what I needed to know there. So it's definitely a challenge to teach that stamina. And Charlie, a high school English teacher, said it's hard for students to learn how to be persuasive. Just having the facts isn't useful. They struggle to take the information a step further. And I think, of course, this is a challenge in the education of every fledgling researcher. But from our interviews, we get the sense that this is becoming more of a problem than it used to be. So it should be no surprise that high school students have been trained how to search by Google. And the amount of information that they have to provide to Google to get results is decreasing over time. And the amount of and what Google gives back to them, the amount of information and the benefit they're getting from it is increasing. So less input, more output. And since Google has been tracking them since they navigated to their first web page, Google can really intuit what they want with minimal input. They also students, they tend to ignore features in other results pages, like in a library resource that aren't in Google. If they don't have to select the source type in Google, for example, they tend to ignore that feature in databases. So we've been calling these Google blinders. And most students, they click on the first result because with Google, that's usually the result they want for example, for like a simple query about recipes or how-to videos. But when it comes to do academic research, the first result is rarely the end-all be-all. It's usually just the start of a larger exploration. So when students outsource their search skills to Google, which does the heavy lifting, they make it much harder to help themselves when it comes time to do serious research, and much harder for librarians and instructors to change those in-grade searching habits. For example, I was observing a student researching Roman history in a database. He typed in Rome, just Rome, and pressed enter, expecting to see a prominent article about Roman history. He scanned the results for 10 minutes and never once thought to add the word history to his query. In reality, I wanted to reach across the table and type it in for him, but it was driving me crazy, but I kept my cool. And another challenge is not finding that rare relevant source, but evaluating the reliability of the source. I hear over and over from students that they look at the URL of a website for .org to determine if something is reliable. Well, .org used to be confined to actual organizations, but now any purveyor of fake news can buy one. It's also difficult for students to find different perspectives, which is often a requirement for assignments. We think this is a direct result of their unsophisticated searching ability. We've seen students type in gun control, for example, looking for pros and cons, but instead they're just at the mercy of the day's news cycle, which usually presents one narrow narrative. So they don't think to modify their search and dig for answers. And the last point I'll make here is about their small bite digital diet. Most interactions they have with information are in 5 to 10 second snippets, and this has serious implications for developing the attention span needed to investigate and read research. So I'm going to hand it back to Serena, but before we'd like you to share your thoughts about the future. Namely, what do you think will be the biggest challenge for libraries in supporting this next generation of researchers? We have our own theories, but we'd love to hear your perspective. So you can type your answer, please, in the WebEx chat area. And I'll hand it to Serena.
Thanks, Stephen. So some of these things, I remember having a colleague observe. This was not a colleague that was in user experience, but did a lot of the technology and observed some users using our platform once, and he said he was horrified at the way that these students weren't doing it correctly. And I think that when we learn about some of these behaviors and tendencies, some of us may instinctively react, with a little bit of horror, but then we put our better minds forward and ask, this is the reality. This is what they live in. There are good and bads about this context. So how should we adapt? Well, that's a very big question, and I think it will take many people to answer it, but I'd like to just suggest one idea. I wanted to suggest that libraries and library resources have a unique value proposition that technology and time haven't actually changed, and that is the strong association as a source of reliable and credible information. Now, students don't necessarily come into college completely aware of that, but once they learn it, they are very loyal and to that understanding. So you've all heard the statistics about how quickly information is multiplying, the concerns over fake news. Think about how challenging this makes the task of this future researcher, as Stephen has just explained. I mean, in many ways, that proliferation of information makes their task even harder than for previous generations of researchers. Despite their adeptness with technology, they are going to need help. It's a difficult world. I think librarians can position themselves to fill this need. I don't know exactly what shape it takes, but if we can position the library not as just a source of content, but a guide for recognizing reliable sources, helping understand how things are related and relevant to one another, maybe providing more context for those bite-sized pieces of information that they're digesting, because there is always more behind them. I'd suggest there's an opportunity for the librarian mission to evolve from teaching how to search to teaching information evaluation and navigation strategies. And we'll probably even come up with a more exciting term for that. Just to illustrate that point a little further, I found this suggestion from James Rosenwig in Library 2020. It was published a few years back, and he proposes that the library becomes an information base camp of sorts. Librarians will increasingly act as guides, experienced climbers who have the skill and the leadership to assist others in their trip up the mountain and back. It talks about it being a transformation that will require librarians to adapt to some new realities. The fact that really their responsibility is to guide through information that is in their control and information that is not in their control. And so it's not about curation, it is about navigation, assessment, and evaluation. I think that this is an interesting idea to think about. I don't have answers to how exactly we invite all the students to enter into the base camp and want to and recognize that they need a guide. I think we can figure those things out, though. For ProQuest, as a library resource provider, we obviously need to understand the context that these students are working in, the environment, and we need to build tools and content that help them navigate to the right content, integrate new types of content into our platform so that they are encountering it within those services and not always thinking it has to be sought outside of the place that they know is reliable and credible. And looking for ways to help make those connections and those dots and support that kind of activity and discovery. Those are our thoughts today. It's been fun to think about how things are changing, how they've changed in the past and how they may change in the future, and what we need to be prepared for. So now we'll have some open up for questions. I think Barb,
Yeah, I've been watching the chat box. So there's been a lot of really good discussion amongst the participants about different topics that you've mentioned. I don't see any direct questions, although there are a lot of good suggestions in here for what you your question to the audience, which was what's your biggest challenge that you're facing. So I think there's some really good information in here for us to really think about, and you all can see what each other are saying. So Serena and Stephen, there'll be some good things in here for you to look at after, but let's see. Here's one question. Do you have any data? Oh, there's more questions coming in. Do you have any data on how international or ESL students do their research?
We don't, well, we certainly have included ESL students in our data set. I think it's an area we've started to look into a little bit. I don't have any ready data to share with you at this point in time. But a lot of times the ones that are willing to participate in our studies, I think, have a fairly high proficiency. So there may be a little self-selection in that. But I think it can be challenging with some of the nuances and terminology that they run into. So that's an area that we actually have slotted for hopefully some future investigation.
Okay, I don't see any other questions in the chat at the moment. We're doing a lot of discussing about video as an option for ESL students, and others are commenting on that. So, but as far as a specific question, I'm not seeing any at the moment.
I see one here that asks for a little bit of information about the studies and the sample sizes. I can give a little bit of that. The largest, the initial study that we did was approximately, actually I think I have these numbers close by, 65 participants. And then there was 3 or 4 years ago, we did 2 or 3 phases of a study, which ended up including about between 125 and 150 participants. And then we've more recently been doing slightly smaller scale, more frequent studies. So we'll usually observe 19, 22, 23 users in one batch, and then write up those observations, and then we try to repeat that cycle in another 6 or 9 months. If that answered the question.
Yeah. They're also talking about methodology. If you can share the methodology of the research.
Sure. For the most part today, I was talking about our observational research and a typical contextual interview session looks like. We do a fair number of them remotely, but we try to balance and do in-person sessions as well. Obviously, there's logistical challenges, and I favor covering more ground using remote tools. So a remote session will make an arrangement with a user and ask if we can get on the phone and they will share their screen, and we'll usually do some introductory questions, getting oriented about what they're studying and how they kind of normally approach research, and then what their task is for the day. And then we'll ask them to go ahead and do your research as you normally would do it. We observe, we take notes. Occasionally we might stop and ask a question, but we try not to disturb what they're doing. And then once they give us a cue that they're probably wrapped up or they've come to a good stopping point, we will finish the session with some additional questions, either about what we've observed or other things. We often have a list of items that we're watching for, and if we observe them, if we didn't observe them, we might ask directly questions about that.
One other question, Serena, was, do you have any data on user behavior for adult learners, those aged 25 and above?
That is an area we don't have a lot of data, no. I mean, certainly we've observed users who are in that age bracket, but they tend to be a little more advanced in their studies. So if you're asking about somebody who may be going back to college or returning to school as an adult, that's not an area we have a lot of data.
I see a reference to a question about accessibility, but I don't actually see the question in the chat.
Yeah, I
so
don't
maybe
have that one.
Maybe it wasn't addressed to all participants, or maybe it was a private message. There was a question from Paula about whether students understand the difference between information formats, and by that I'm taking information formats to mean like source types like newspapers and magazines and books, etc. And especially with early researchers, like high school researchers, we find that they don't understand that difference, and they expect that databases are really just collections of websites like Google. So it's kind of a paradigm shift for them to think about a library resource as a gateway to all sorts of different types of content, not just a bunch of websites.
Scrolling for the accessibility question.
Yeah. So the accessibility question is, did you interview any students who required accessibility software? And we I don't think in our current study we have any that we've directly interviewed.
This particular, sorry, Stephen, I can answer. Batch of information that we were reporting on didn't really reflect that, although I think they're, well, I should probably speak out of turn. There are some students who maybe reported, I can't concentrate, I have attention challenges, and so I want to, so this is how I accommodate it. We have done studies in the past where we have tested our platform with students with disability firsthand. That's been a few years back now, but we do try to pay attention to that in some different research streams. I do think that the learning disability aspect of the accessibility is an area where we can pay more attention, and it's really interesting.
And then one last question is, what should we be doing for the aspiring student?
Do you want to take that, Stephen?
Aspiring students.
So the Aspiring Scholar, which would be that scholar who's trying to make a contribution, a unique contribution to their field that they've chosen. I think those are the ones who we see often struggle to find library resources that could be very helpful. And I think those are the ones who would be very responsive to having sort of a librarian consultant or partner. One thing that students have told us in some of the studies is that we would ask them about their library instruction experience, and they would kind of, yeah, we had that first year course. They'd roll their eyes a little bit. It's kind of boring. They'd begrudgingly admit that it did help them. But what they The ones where they were very enthusiastic about engagement with library instruction was when it happened more in, say, like a junior or senior course where it was subject specific and they were being shown tools that could help them, like, for example, a marketing student and the librarian came and showed them, look, we have all these resources that get you this data that you will need to do the work that a marketing person does. And they were very engaged and appreciative of those kinds of things. So I think it's about helping with those kinds of sources, and also particularly in areas where people need to access primary sources, somehow working with faculty and advisors to send those graduate students to the library to help point them in the right direction to get to those kinds of sources.
All right, well, this is Mark from ACRL and Choice jumping in here. I just want to say thanks to you, Serena and Stephen, for taking time to present for us today. Appreciate it. It's been a very interesting conversation, and I think we've got a lot to chew on here. I would just also remind our viewers that we did record today's program, so be on the lookout for a follow-up email from ACRL and Choice with a link to the recording. And thanks again to everybody who's out there listening in. Thanks for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed the session, and I hope the rest of your day is great. Thanks so much.